biology, soil is just dirt. It's not alive. Oh, and any of the Zoomy people had questions?
No, we didn't. I forgot to put record on,
Oh, okay.
but now
So-
it is recording.
Biology is essential for soil, and it's created the soils on our planet. It only exists because of biology. So to start off with, I just want to introduce a concept that people aren't familiar with it of a holobiont. And this is the definition: assemblage of the host and many other species living in or around it, which together form a discrete ecological unit through symbiosis. And there I have a picture of, well, here's a little aside. This is I think it's a spruce tree in the Walbrand Valley on the island in the old growth forest. And it's completely festooned in old growth speckled belly lichen, which is a endangered lichen. And we went and found it in the hopes of actually protecting. This tree is in a cut block. It's destined to be cut, but it might be saved because of the lichen. Anyway, lichen is a holobiont. Lichen is a combination of a what they call microbiont, which is a fungus, and a photobiont, which is often algae or cyanobacteria or something like that. And together they form, the fungus gives it its structure, and then the photobiont basically gives it the ability to photosynthesize and get nutrients from, or do photosynthesis. And lichens are probably one of the ways that soil really first started building up.
First Nation people ate lichens too?
Yeah?
And would they eat this?
I don't know about that one. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about eating lichens.
It's part of our diet.
Yeah? I mean, possibly they would have. I mean, it would just be a coastal thing. Because it's really just in the really old growth forests. The reason why I bring up the idea of holobionts is because it started with Dr. Lynn Margulis, who was a microbiologist in the 60s, 70s, 80s. She died in 2011. She coined this term, and originally it was applied to corals and lichens and things like that. But as microbiology got more advanced and better tools, they realized that plants are holobionts, trees are holobionts, we're holobionts. We don't exist. We don't exist without our microbiome. You would be dead without bacteria and fungi that are within and on your body. They're what allow us to be healthy. When they're in balance, we're healthy people. When they're out of balance, we're not. And when they're gone, we're dead. And so, really, like, people get really super fussed up about they and them and gender hide things, but we're all they thems. Actually, we're not. You're not even you. Like, I'm not Daniel. That's just an idea I have. But I'm an assemblage of organisms that walks around and calls itself Daniel. So. This is important to understand in terms of soil biology, because plants are not individual things either. They're in a big web of interrelated. And when you talk about First Nations, these are all indigenous ideas that everything is connected and that we're all in relationship with each other. All of regenerative farming is basically using indigenous worldviews and practices, for the most part. So we got to remember that too, and get all caught up in the science of, like, isn't the science great and understanding this thing? Yeah, the science is basically telling us what indigenous people have been saying the whole time. So we're all connected, we're all related to each other. So down to the soil food web. This was first coined by Dr. Elaine Ingham, if people are familiar with her work. She actually, she was a microbiologist at various universities, and if people know the Rodale Institute, she was their chief scientist for quite a while. And then she formed the Soil Food Web School because she felt this idea was really important for people to understand. So I've definitely studied stuff she's written and had webinars with her. And again, this is about the soil food web idea. It describes the transfer of energy between systems in an ecosystem, between species in an ecosystem. but generally it refers to the relationships among the wide range of organisms in the soil. And it starts, well, we have the plant roots, but the plant roots then have interchanges. So plants, when through photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide, they turn them into sugars and various other things. They send them down to their roots to feed the creatures that are in what biologists call the rhizosphere, which is the area right around their roots. And there's a whole bunch of different bacteria, a whole bunch of fungi in a healthy soil. And they are exchanging with the plant, so the plant gives them sugar, basically, and various things like that they want, carbon, which is basically sugar, and then the bacteria and the fungi bring the plants nutrients from the soil. And so there's an exchange there. And then the web gets bigger and you have your protozoa feeding on the bacteria and your nematodes feeding on the bacteria and the fungi and the protozoa. And then you have other things eating them, and it goes up in what they call trophic levels, which is just basically starting with plants who make their own energy from the sun. Everybody else in this, except for some bacteria, are getting their energy from consuming other things, all the way up to, you know, the higher trophic levels of mammals and birds and people. Any questions about this? Yeah.
What is that?
That's supposed to be a mole.
It's really
happy.
A happy mole.
It's really happy.
Yeah.
And then what is not endo?
Okay, wow. Oh, geez, Vivian.
Okay.
Endophytes are a type of bacteria that plants take into themselves. They actually go inside the plant. You're probably all familiar with like legumes like alfalfa and peas and beans have these little nitrogen fixing nodules on their roots. Those are created by endophytes. So there's certain type of nitrogen fixing, they call them rhizobia, they're a type of bacteria. They attach to the plant roots, and then the plants actually encase them in those nodules to protect them. And then those rhizobia fix nitrogen from the air and the soil, well, the air in the soil, into the plant's roots, and that's one way plants get nitrogen. But I'm going to go into this, it gets really crazy. Like there's also endophytes that go all throughout the plant. They go up in it. There's endophytes in its stems, there's endophytes in its leaves and its seeds and its flowers and its fruit. And they do different things. One of them, and they're not just bacteria, they're also fungi, usually yeast, so single-celled fungi. And they have incredible benefits for the plant. They are probiotic. They protect the plant from disease, pests, other fungi, other bacteria. So that's the endophytes. And that's a whole big, huge can of worm, really. But, any other questions about the soil food web? Or anything up there that's written there that you'd like me to talk about a bit more? No?
So are we adding fungi to our soil?
We should be.
I just go there.
So I'm going to read this out to you, even though I know you all can read. Soil food web functions. This is from a talk or an interview with Dr. Lane Ingham in Permaculture magazine. It cycles nutrients in rock, sand, silt, and clay, and organic matter into plant available forms, which I talked a bit about in the biological erosion of parent materials. It retains nutrients in the soil so leaching, losses, and erosions do not occur. Protects all surfaces of plants from disease, pests, and parasite attack. Decomposes toxic chemicals that would otherwise kill plants. Converts waste into plant beneficial materials. And then most importantly, it builds soil structure. It converts dead plant residues into well-structured, well-aggregated organic matter, allowing the free movement of atmospheric gases, water, and roots through the soil. Because basically soil it's got 45% of that rock parent material we talked about, then it's got probably 5% organic matter, 5 to 7% organic matter is ideal. And then the other almost 50% is equal amounts of water and air for it to function. So, and that last thing is if you've got a well-structured organic matter in your soil, then those things can exist and move about. So going back into the soil food web, these are the first sort of two trophic layers after plants. is you've got up in the, what's that, left-hand corner in the top are your bacteria, and then your fungi in the right, and then protozoas down in the left bottom corner, and then a nematode there, and they're there in quantities and diversity that are almost unimaginable, particularly bacteria, but fungi as well. Soil is basically the most biologically active zone, and it harbors I said this already, but I'm going to say it again. It harbors the largest genetic diversity of any ecosystem, including the ocean. And when we have a more diverse soil community, so when the more bacteria and more fungi and different types of nematodes and protozoa you have, it has what they call a bottom-up control. So it affects from the bottom, it affects the entire food web all the way up to the top. So when you have greater diversity of these things, you have a greater diversity of the things that eat them, and then a greater diversity of the things that eat them, and so on and so forth. And in each of those interactions too, benefits are accrued up I don't want to use the food chain because it's not a chain, it's a web, but they're accrued outwards. So when we have healthy soils, we're healthy people, right?
So what is the forest fire do?
Forest fire. I would love to know the answer to that, and I think there was some work being done on the McKay fire about that. I can't really speak to that, but I think. Good.
Yeah, Jackie Rasmussen Elris connected with UBC and they're working with the various guardians with the bands, and they're doing some pretty cool work trying to protect some plots and see what happens after the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly they're looking at, what hinders or helps the invasive plants.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, but they're learning all kinds of other things too. And they actually have a podcast, a 2-part CBC ideas.
Oh, that's right.
That's just come out. And it's very cool. And yeah, it's kind of complements some of what you're talking about, but just related to fire ecology. It's grim news though, I gotta say.
I do know that fire adversely affects particularly soil fungi. So when we burn our crop residues in our garden, it's a bad idea. Plus you're also of the bacteria, you're destroying all of this stuff.
Didn't the old timers used to do that every year to avoid carbon?
Yeah, but it's not the ideal way. It's sort of, it does promote carbon. You do want carbon in your soil. Like there's people make biochar now, I think, to kind of emulate what the old timers were doing, because you do want that. But if you're burning your crop residue, you're taking all that biology out of the system, basically, and not recycling it in and feeding the soil with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I guess it was expedient.
Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
really quick way. And there are effects like nitrogen's released, and so it often has then my plants did really a lot better. I know when I put wood ash on where I grow my cucumbers, they do so much better. And so we used to often burn our tree prunings right where we're going to do the cucumbers. And, it's not like they're bad. It's not like, well, you shouldn't do that. But on a garden-wide scale, I wouldn't recommend burning your garden to get rid of your garden debris. Tilling. I'm going to talk about tilling, but that's another one. Oops, bad. No, hit the wrong button. Okay, go ahead. So the first of those 4 bacteria, they're single-cell organisms that don't have a nucleus, which the word is prokaryote, if anyone cares. They do have DNA, and they divide. They use what they call binary fission to reproduce. And the cool thing about bacteria, well, there's millions of cool things about bacteria. They, like fungi, have an external digestive system, unlike us. We have an internal where we put food and it goes into our stomach, and fungi and bacteria basically, well, it's this is gross, but imagine you see your food there and you throw up on it, and then you kind of absorb it into your body. That's kind of how they eat. And the bacteria they don't really produce waste. So when there's more food present, they just reproduce more. So with a lot of organic matter in a biologically active soil, you just have lots and lots of bacteria. And so they accrue all these nutrients of the things that they're eating in their bodies, they hold them there, and then it requires other organisms to actually release that so that plants can use it. Does that make sense? Like they need.
Say it again?
Because they don't excrete waste, they need something else. Well, they don't need it, but the plants need it. The soil biology needs something else to come along and consume the bacteria, and it basically breaks down their cell walls. And then that nutrient is then available, usually through whatever organism ate them, through their waste, to the plants. Oh. Okay, what else? So I talked about bacteria that only live in the root zone, the rhizobacteria. They're not the only ones. There's free bacteria in the soil that go out and they collect stuff. So plants, when they put their exudates down into the soil, I did say exudates, right? Talked about that. So the sugars, the carbon compounds that plants have, they send them down through their roots out into the soil, and it attracts a whole variety of what's in the soil. So the bacteria and the fungi, they come to the roots, and then the plant starts, they together start having actually a little conversation about what they each want. And so the bacteria are like, well, we want the sugar, or whatever it is they want from the plant, and the plant's like, well, I want some magnesium, go get it for me. Or I want some phosphorus, go get it for me. Well, fungi particularly actually are amazing phosphorus scavengers. Because they can go deep into the soil. I'll talk about fungi in a second. But so bacteria have this in exchange with the plants, and they go and they get what the plants want. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the rhizophagy cycle, which blew my mind when I first learned about it. It's only been in the last 10 or so years that people even knew this existed. But it's where bacteria go inside plants and they have this whole incredible exchange of nutrients. Anything else I'm missing here? Oh, here's what their role is. Okay, in the soil food web. So they extract the nutrients from the soil. They decompose soil organic matter. And they get nutrients also from sand, silt, and clay, as well as the organic matter. They make all kinds of different enzymes that plants can use. Some release hormones, B vitamins, amino acids, and volatile organic compounds that trigger different responses in plants. It can make a plant bushier, or it can make a plant grow taller, or all kinds of stuff. And they're consumed by protozoa, which are amoeba and ciliates and flagellates, and they're also consumed by nematodes. And then what they also do is they actually make a kind of glue that'll glue little tiny soil particles together, which they call microaggregates, and then they hide in them, so away from the protozoa. And that actually helps. That's the first sort of level of building soil structure. If you want good soil structure, it starts here with these little bacteria. And then I mentioned this thing about the plant exudates telling them what nutrients to get. So they go out in the soil and they find them.
Can you add bacteria to your soil?
You can, but I'll talk about that in a minute too. It's not ideal. Actually, most of our soils are over-bacterial. But you can add certain bacteria to your soil. It's better. It's basically, you don't want to just do you want to be more specific. So there's certain types of bacteria you want to attract to your soils. And there are a whole bunch of, some of them are really old methods of doing that. And some of them are newer. But
kind of an interesting adaptation for something that doesn't have species motility or a brain to hide in a bit of gravel.
Yeah. Some of them do have motility to some extent because they are there's ones right around the plant root zone that definitely are less mobile, but the ones that go scavenging out, they have little flagellates and they move out in between. Like there's a thin water film in the soil structure, and they move out in there. And they can go far and wide. But I think fungi are probably the big ones for traveling. And then another thing about the bacteria is there's unimaginable billions of them. In 1 gram of soil, there's at least 1 billion bacteria in this much soil. And so when you have all that bacteria, they also die. And so the soil is built up by their dead bodies. And when their cell walls get degraded, then their nutrients also are released into the soil that way. And so they're building soil organic matter when they die, and they're releasing nutrients when they die, and amino acids, which plants can then get. So fungi are the other big members of this sort of exchange with plants. Are people familiar with the ecto and endo mycorrhizal, or the idea of a mycorrhizal association with plants? Nope, not so much? Okay. This is a trip. Fungi have made associations over millennia with plants where they will, either in the case of ecto, which just means outside, they'll make a protective coating outside the plant cell walls, and then they exchange nutrients with the plant. So the plant's giving them carbohydrates, and plant's giving them sugars, and the fungi are giving the plants nutrients that they want. And then there's another one called endo, which is where the fungi actually goes inside the cell wall of the plant and creates these structures there that do the same exchange. In all of our garden crops, it's basically endomycorrhizal fungi, or they call them AMF for short, which is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, because of how they anyway, you don't really, that's too much weirdness, sorry. But they're called, if you're ever studying soil stuff and you hear about AMF fungi, that's what they're talking about. It's fungi that go inside the cell walls of the plants, and they're exchanging with plants. And all of our garden, pretty much all of our garden plants have arbuscular or endomycorrhizal partners. Some of them have more than one. An exception is brassicas. For some weird reason, they just stand alone. But brassicas are neat because they're actually hyperbioaccumulators. They take up a lot of nutrients themselves just from the soil, which is why people use them as green crops. Well, I'll talk about that when I get to green crops. How are people doing? Is this information like absorbable? Is it too much?
It's very good.
Not too fast?
No.
No, not too slow? Okay. So the fungi, they, like I said, they make exchange with the plants for exudates, and they will go deep into the soil and find what the plant wants and bring it back. And the other really amazing thing that fungi do is they will make connections across a variety of plants. So it's why now in regenerative growing, they're like, the more diversity of living roots that we have in the soil, the better. And it's largely it's because of the fungi, because they're connecting it all, and they can actually move a nutrient from one plant to another. So if this plant over here doesn't have enough phosphorus and these plants have too much, the fungi will be like, and they bring it over there over long, big distances. So we need them. And they have three main functions in the soil food web. So there's decomposers, which they call saprophytes, which basically eat woody material. We would be piled up in dead debris everywhere if it wasn't for fungi. There's, if you go out into this forest and you see when a pine tree falls, and you know how it gets brown and crumbly when so that's a type of fungi. They call it brown cuboidal rot. And it's a type of fungi that eats cellulose. And what's left is the lignin. That's the brown, crumbly stuff you see. There's another type of fungi called white rot fungi, and they eat lignin. And they're one of the few things on the planet that does. There's some types of bacteria that do a bit too, but fungi are the only ones really that can, like, en masse eat. They exude powerful acids, basically, that break down the lignin, and then they can consume it and make it available in the soil food web. Otherwise, it would just be lying on the ground, not rotting. And because of this neat thing that they do with the lignin, they're also, a lot of them are white rot fungi, are able to convert pollutants or poisons in the soil into harmless carbohydrates and stuff. So oyster mushrooms, which is one of my favorites, is a white rot fungi. And so you'll see it grown mostly on cottonwoods around here. And it's eating the lignin of the dead cottonwoods. And the other, oh, sorry, okay, just one more thing. There's a fourth thing that fungi do, some of them eat nematodes. They're actually predatory fungi, and the way they do this, and oyster mushrooms is one, is in their mycelium, so that's the mycelium there. A single strand of that, a little strand is called a hypha. So from one of their hypha, a nematode will be cruising by and they'll actually lasso it with some hypha, and they'll grab it and trap it, and then they'll eat it. And get nutrients from it that way. So,
Pull a little shot
anyway,
forward.
that was, so sorry, I got distracted, but so we have the decomposing function of fungi in the soil. We also have the mutualist, they call mutualist, which is the symbiotic function of, that's the mycorrhizal fungi that work with plants to gather nutrients and get food from the plants. So, and then the third one is the one that everybody's like, oh, this is no good, are the pathogenic fungi. And they basically, people are like, oh, they're bad. They're not bad. They have a role in the ecosystem that's really important. And often they only occur when things are out of balance. They're usually, when you have something like that, it's usually a signal to you that you need to work on your soil food web balance. There's sort of three pillars or like a triangle of fungal disease in a plant, and it needs three things. And one is for the fungi to be present. It needs a host, but it also needs environmental conditions. And it's only when all three of those things are right that the fungi will be pathogenic. And pathogenic fungi can, and this is also the case with bacteria, like E. coli, for instance. There's E. coli everywhere, and it's only under certain circumstances that it's dangerous to us. And say pathogenic fungi, they can exist in the soil all the time, and you'll never know they're there, and they're not causing any trouble until something goes awry, and then they're telling you something. Just gonna see if I'm missing anything important. Oh, that's about it, I think. Oh, okay, and then fungi are eaten by nematodes, and then larger, what they call microarthropods, which are like your springtails, little pill bugs, other mites, they eat fungi, and then because they're retaining the nutrients in the soil, those things eat them, and those things poop out their waste. Those wastes become bioavailable to plants. So that's part of the whole big nice web. All right, how are we doing for time? Okay. So nematodes, this is actually a photograph I took through my microscope of a bacterial feeding nematode. I just took it with my iPhone too. And so nematodes are non-segmented microscopic worms. And originally people thought they were bad because the first ones identified were root-feeding nematodes. But it turns out there's a bunch of nematodes. There's root-feeding nematodes. There are bacterial-feeding nematodes like this one here. There are fungal-feeding nematodes, and then there's predatory nematodes that prey on other nematodes. They prey on other things in the soil, they eat protozoa. And then there's omnivorous nematodes, or they call them switcher nematodes. They can actually switch their whole life cycle according to what's available in the soil. And they keep things in check, other populations of not too much bacteria, not too many protozoa, this sort of, if you have a lot of fungal feeders, it means there's a lot of fungi in your soil, which is a good thing. They make the nutrients inside the things they eat bioavailable through their poop, like I said. They also form microaggregates. Fungi form microaggregates. Sorry about this. Fungi produce a glue called glomalin that actually takes soil particles and puts them together in chunks. So when you got that nice crumbly soil in your garden, that's because of fungi as well as bacteria, and also because of nematodes and worms too. And then if you have root-feeding nematodes in your garden, it usually means that your soil is either too dry or too anaerobic. So again, it's telling you something. All these things will tell you something when they're out of balance. It's up to us to figure out what it is. Sometimes it's harder. All right, and then the last are the protozoa. These are the single-celled organisms like amoebas. There's 3 types of them generally in the soil food web, and there's amoebas. There are ciliates and flagellates, and flagellates have these long, thin whip-like tails, and they can just, if you look at them in a microscope, they just zoom in across. And ciliates are more anaerobic, so if someone tells you have a lot of ciliates in your soil, it means you need more air in your soil or less water. So they eat bacteria, and they're essential they're the main cyclers of the nutrients that bacteria gather. They're the ones that make it possible for it to get out into the food web and then up to plants, because they are bacterial grazers. They're eaten by the microarthropods as well as worms and predatory nematodes. Worms love protozoa, and they just slurp them right up, and then they extract the nutrients, and then they dump it into the soil as their castings, all that lumpy goodness. Okay, so that's the 4 main actors on the lower level that we don't see in the soil food web. So how do plants eat? People know? What's that? Well, yeah, kind of. I always thought it was cool, like plants eat sunlight, that's so cool, but actually kind of they don't really, I mean, they do. But photosynthesis is, they're taking light energy and they're turning it into chemical energy, and then they're using the chemicals. They do use some of those chemicals to feed themselves, so yes, they do eat light, but mostly they take that chemical energy, they put it into roots and send it out into the soil food web and get everybody else to do it for them. So yes and no. I have boring notes. Okay, so they get their nutrients mostly from the roots, so the rhizosphere, and they do it in several different ways. One is through soluble, like things that are water soluble, and that's how conventional farming and even organic farming has largely been feeding plants over the years. It's like we're like, put the water soluble nitrogen into the soil and the plants will eat it. And organic farmers, we tend to like put, like blood meal or bone meal or whatever it is on the soil and gets worked in, but it's the same kind of thing. It's a water soluble thing. And it's not the only way they eat. They also eat through that, when I was talking about the cation exchange thing, they eat ionically. They're taking these minerals in through that process. And then a huge one is through mycorrhizal relationships, the fungi going out and getting them stuff from the soil, and then through their relationship with the bacteria in their roots, the nitrogen fixing ones, but there's other ones that they have as well. And then there's this, before I get into endophytes, I want to talk about, so this is more sciencey talk, I'm sorry. But this explains the rhizosphere, and so that's that initial area right around the roots, and then the mycorrhizosphere is where the soil is influenced by both fungi and the roots, and then the hyphosphere is where the fungal hyphae can go out into the soil and get all of the foods, and so they get it in a whole bunch of ways, so they're eating things and bringing it back. Now this is the trippy thing, the rhizophagy cycle. This is a bit of a weird slide, I'm sorry, I couldn't find a good one, but the plants put out root exudates that attract a certain type of bacteria in the soil, and then the bacteria gather right around the very tip of their little root hairs, and then they actually go inside the very tip of the root hair into the plant and become endophytic inside the plant. And when they do that, they actually strip off their cell walls and they become these little weird bacterial spheres of nutrients. And in that process, they produce ethylene, which to plants is a stress hormone, basically acts as a stressor. And so the plant bombards them with super oxygen, basically. And that takes all what's left of the bacteria and it dissolves them, and it eats and the plant gets the nutrients. It basically farms these bacteria, takes the nutrients from them, and then that oxidization process creates new root hair formation, and the microbes go up, what's left of them. Some of them just dissolve into nothing, but some of them survive, and they go up into the root hairs and back out into the soil where they reform their cell walls. They go out and they scavenge more nutrients, and then they go and do the whole thing again. And so every little root hair on a plant, and there's many of them, is doing this. with billions of bacteria all the time. And then it gets really kooky, is that some of those bacteria they actually produce nitric oxide, which is an antioxidant, and it protects them from being bombarded with this superoxidant. And then the plant moves them up to other parts of their body, the plantness, and they actually live in the plant tissue. And as part of the chain reaction, this is too much chemistry, I know, sorry, but between the nitric oxide and the superoxygen, there's a process and it creates nitrogen. So they're fixing nitrogen for the plant inside itself. We always thought plants can't fix nitrogen. Well, they can with bacteria inside them, not just in their roots. So, and this is happening all the time. So Dr. James White, he's a microbiologist at Rutgers University. He and his team have been studying this really quite intensively lately. And I think the term was coined in 2016, which gives rise to that realization that, so we've discovered this whole new way plants eat within the last 10 or 15 years. Well, what else don't we know? There could be a whole other methods that we have no idea about. Okay, now back to soil. So we talked about, Ina asked the question about putting bacteria in your soil. Oh, that's 2 Ds on dominated, oh, sorry. And this is about the ratio when amounts of fungi to bacteria you have in your soil, and it goes from bacterial dominated on the left up to fungal dominated on the right. And a bacterial dominated soil would be something like a beach, or the transition between beach and the first sort of zone is what we would call the first successional state in ecology. So there's this idea of ecological systems progressively moving towards a more diverse state, and that happens with an increasing ratio of fungi to bacteria in the soil. What was I going to say about this? They have a disturbed bacterial dominated soil is usually high alkalinity. And then it becomes more acidic, which as it goes towards old growth forests being the ultimate fungal dominated soil. If anyone has ever been in one, it's just like you can smell the fungi. Where we want to be is in the middle. As gardeners, the 1-to-1 ratio is ideal. Of course, it's plant dependent again too. Like some plants prefer it to be more alkaline. Potatoes. Some plants prefer it to be more acidic, like blueberries and stuff. So it's like you can target depending on what you want your plant to have and what it likes, or what area of your, say if you're doing a permacultural scene, then you need to kind of work in between your perennials and your annuals and stuff. But if you're mostly growing annuals, then being a slightly more bacterial dominated is okay. If you're growing perennials, you definitely want a more fungal soil.
When we mentioned acidic and alkaline, almost in unison with fungal and bacteria, you mean that acidic is more fungal?
No, sorry, I wasn't clear. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. But yes, I do mean that.
Okay.
Bacterial is more alkaline, acidic is more fungal is more acidic. Yes. Sorry, I'm talking too fast.
But it's the fungal that creates the acidity, not that the acidity attracts the fungal.
Exactly.
And the same with the bacteria.
And so if people need to get up and stretch or have a little break.
Could I ask a question from the Zoom?
Yes, just 1 second here. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, but I don't know if I missed it, but when you referred to mid-successional, what is that? What succession? What does that mean?
Oh yeah, sorry. It's successional. So so if we think of our gardens as an ecosystem, in an ecological succession, you're going from a bacterially dominated more alkaline environment with more weeds, basically. It has more weeds and more like early annual plants. So a disturbed soil, when you till, every time we till, we're knocking our garden back to its first successional state. And then if we stop tilling and we go along, say your goal is to create a old growth forest, well, halfway between those two is where we want our garden to be. Does that make it a little more clear? So there's a succession always of ecosystems getting more diverse and more complicated generally. I mean, obviously it depends on temperature and climate and a whole bunch of other things, but does that help?
Jamie?
Well, I'm sorry, but I won't keep you on it. I'll go study a bit more. Thanks.
Well, I don't know. Is anybody else wondering what that means? I'm not making it clear.
I just had a question about too, because the soil is actually damaging that natural exchange that's really going on in the soil that is disrupting it.
Well, if people just want to keep going, I will talk about tilling. So what can we do to work with the soil food web? Stop tilling. As the main thing. Tilling causes oxidation of soil carbon. There's a process, I forget what it's called, but where basically soil carbon then turns into gas and goes up and becomes carbon dioxide. And if people are paying attention to climate change, we want to bring those levels in the atmosphere down rather than adding to them. Agriculture, probably after, it's sort of a tie between agriculture and forestry, but after fossil fuel industry, agriculture and forestry are the major contributors to atmospheric carbon on the planet. And tilling not only by the oxidation of the carbon in the soil, but also through erosion. It causes soil erosion because you're destroying your soil structure, so it's nutrients leach out of it. Soil actually is lost through erosion. Erosion is a massive, they figure we have 60 years left of soil, of like agricultural soil on this planet, given the way that we're farming right now. And erosion is a huge cause of that, and it's acidifying oceans. We're putting all these nutrients into the ocean that shouldn't be there, and it's overwhelming the ocean's ability to cycle carbon. Anyway, people can Google the carbon cycle and learn more about that. I'm not like I said, I'm not a scientist. I can't really explain it super well, but I know that tilling is a huge part of what we're doing with this. And part of it is that the tilling destroys soil fungi. It destroys them. So if we're tilling our garden, we're not going to have fungi in our soil other than yeasts. But any kind of fungal webs, no, we're not going to have any mycorrhizal fungal connections with our plants because they can't handle being chopped up all the time. And fungi are like one of the major storages of soil carbon. So when we're tilling up the fungi, again, there it goes up through the atmosphere.
This comes as kind of a relief because I was just looking at my garden thinking that I should really dig the heck out of it.
Yeah, don't dig your garden if you can help it.
You're off the hook.
It's okay
I
to
didn't want to because I'm lazy, but
well,
really?
I don't know if you're familiar with Masanobu Fukuoka. I probably pronounced his name wrong, but he wrote this book called One Straw Revolution. He's a Japanese farmer. His philosophy was like, do nothing.
Well, I'm good with that.
So, yeah. So, and he's sort of
consistent with our approach. Yeah.
And he was right, because this is what he's talking about. When we do stuff, we don't understand. That's like science is, we had the green revolution where we put fertilizers all across the planet and we tilled the soils all across the planet. For a little while it worked and we fed people, but now the soils are dying. And they're pumping more and more fertilizer and more pesticides and fungicides and herbicides into the soil to try and deal with these things. When we destroy the mycorrhizal relationship, well, when we till the soil basically and then give the plants nitrogen-based fertilizers, they stop engaging in these other cycles. they stop the mesophagy cycle because they're thinking, oh, I'm getting all this like really cheap, easy energy. I don't need to exchange my energy. So then the mycorrhizal connections break down, the bacteria stop being taken into the plant, and then the plant, is taking all this nitrogen, gets really like leggy. But what happens is when you're watering it, then its cell walls, like it gets super thin, and they start leaking ethylene, which tells the pests and other predators to come and kill the plant. It's actually calling up, help me, I'm really messed up. Take me out of the ecosystem. That's kind of what they're saying. And so then we dump more pesticides and more fungicides on them, thinking, well, that'll solve the problem, but it's not a good idea.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, but instead of dumping on pesticides and all that stuff, if we dump on like a big layer of manure, like organic matter and things like that, compost, wouldn't that replace or replenish, and then you can still till, but it's new stuff in there?
Yeah, not manure so much, but definitely compost. I'll talk about that too. So, so that was like all the bad stuff. So this is the main thing we can do is build soil, organic matter. And the main ways to do that in a regenerative system, and I'm assuming you came here because that was one of your interests, because that is what I'm talking about, is a cover crop, green manures. The more diversity of plant roots we have in the soil, photosynthesizing, the healthier our soils are. Plants create healthy soils. We don't. They do it. We don't have to do it. We just, as long as we put plants in. And obviously, if your soil is really messed up, there's other things you have to do to try and fix it. But the more photosynthesizing plants we have, we should never have bare soil. And I'm guilty of having bare soil sometimes, and I feel awful every time. But cover crops. And if you can't do that, so the second thing would be mulches. Mulches they have their definite uses, but living organic mulches are better. They're the best. And if you want to mulch, you can always, like, what I do is I actually cut my weeds when they're growing in amongst my plants and just mulch the soil with them. And so there's still a living root there. There's a cover that's keeping in soil moisture, and there's food for all the soil microorganisms. And then a third way that people are doing on a larger scale is rotational grazing, where animals actually, I know that vegans and people who may disagree with this, but animals play a really important role in the ecosystem. And here, before colonization, basically, there were a lot of animals in the ecosystem, and they were cycling nutrients and helping against fire and doing all these things. And we've taken a lot of them out of in the prairies. We've taken out the buffaloes, dumbest idea. And they're what made the prairies so diverse and healthy and vibrant, and why when the settlers came around, look at the soil, we can grow such amazing grain. Yeah, you could because of the buffalo. So now regenerative ranchers basically are using rotational grazing systems where they're moving animals through a pasture system quite quickly, so that they eat, like say you have 100 cows, you put them on a certain area, and then they have one pass on the grass, and then they're moved the next day, and then the next day, and they're not allowed to go back that first spot for months. And it actually strengthens the grass because they build more root structure when they've been chomped once. But if you take them down too far, then they get sick and weakened. We can do this in our garden on some levels, or if we have a small homestead, we can use animals. I really want to get sheep for fire prevention because I'm so sick of weed whacking. And also it just seems wrong. And burning, I don't want to burn grass every year. I want something to eat it, poop it out. But we can, in our gardens, we can use chickens and chicken tractors. But again, the key is to move them quickly, especially chickens, because they have quite strong nitrogen and phosphorus poops. And you don't want that. It can actually create a dead zone if you keep them there too long.
And presumably they also break the fungi.
Yeah, probably if you let them scratch too much.
Yeah, but that would be the moving them.
Yeah, so, and then rabbits are probably another good thing in a garden system. I know that the idea is diversity of animals too is good. So if you had rabbits and chickens and turkeys in your garden, you could move them around have them follow each other, it would be, good. But you don't have to, yeah.
And if you just control the ratio of animals, then you wouldn't necessarily have to do intensive locations, right?
Yeah,
If you had, because if you have a big flock of chickens in a spot right here, it's not gonna be grass left.
yeah.
But if you just have you have more chickens,
Mhm.
hopefully they don't pick a bigger spot.
Yeah, well, then you have to move, you have to be in
Yeah.
charge of moving
Right.
them, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add the animals in there because I feel important. But so, and then the fourth way is compost. And compost in terms of soil organic matter, even the very best composts, the Johnson Sioux type of compost only adds about 0.25% of soil organic matter. It's more the living plants that are adding the organic matter, but still compost is amazing. And it adds so much more, which is, so I covered all this stuff. There's me.
But going back to your cover crops,
Yeah,
so you are planting them, but then you're also constantly whacking them down, like cutting them down so that they're not just plants.
yeah, there's different ways to deal with it. So this is the thing that often people come up against. It's like, well, if I've got green manure, how do I get it into the soil without tilling?
Yeah.
And that definitely stumped me for a long time too. But there are methods that people are using. On larger farms, they have these crimper rollers that they put on tractors, and they're like a big steel cylinder with these chevron-shaped ridges of steel on them. And when they roll them over the plant, it breaks them off right close to the root like that. And then it creates a living, well, it's a dead mulch because it does usually kill the plant, but it creates a mulch over the soil. And then they drill seed into that for their next crop. We can emulate that in the garden by, I grow buckwheat in amongst my corn. I let the corn get up a certain height and then I sow buckwheat in. And then once the corn's like say yay high now and the buckwheat's up here, I just go down between the rows like a penguin and I squish the buckwheat all down, and then it provides this really cool like mulch on the soil and then gets incorporated into the soil.
So it's not extracting the nitrogen
Yeah,
from
well,
the corn.
buckwheat are nitrogen fixers, which I didn't know, because they're not legumes, but they're one of the rare other plants that do extract. So they're actually adding, when you do that, they're adding nitrogen to your corn. Yeah. Other methods that people use, like if you want to clear a whole bed, you've got green manure in it, you can use tarps, like black tarps. I've used black poly plastic, which I don't like for a number of reasons. It rips like pretty easily. Mine lasted 2 years before garbage. But silage tarps are used, they last a lot longer. Your question?
Well, I just wanted to add to that, I've noticed comfrey is an amazing mulch creator because it grows tall at 3 times, right, in the season, and it falls over.
Yeah.
Crazy mulch, and it grows, yeah, it falls over, and it's like a constant thing that it'll fall over. You don't want to tell that.
No. Yeah, well, I mean, certain things, if you like buckwheat, if you till buckwheat when it's too high, it's going to wreck up your rototiller, and you're going to be trying to fix it, clean it out all the time. But comfrey's awesome as a compost addition too. It's really great for that. And of course, people make comfrey tea and put it on their gardens and stuff. Another method you can do with your green manures is you can scythe or weed whack them down or mow them. Like I've just used the lawnmower on rye before, and I just mow it every time it grows up, and it mulches. It's a mulching lawnmower, so it just sends it back into the soil. And then you can plant crops that you know will get winter killed. So you know that certain things will die if you plant them in the fall. It'll cover your soil, but then it'll die and won't probably come back in the spring.
Yeah, I just had a lot of success with that last year for the first time. So after the garlic crop, in my garlic beds, I seeded buckwheat. Then it came up so thick the rest of the season. It kept any of the weeds from coming up, and then it winter killed.
Right.
So it's kind of perfect.
Yeah.
What crop is that?
Buckwheat.
So there, I mean, well, okay, talk about cover crops a little more. There's 4 types, I guess people are aware of, like grasses, legumes, brassicas, and then the other broadleaf crops like buckwheat. In the cool season for the grass, you got rye, oats, wheat, barley, triticale, spelt, I guess. And then warm season grasses, apparently, I've never used this, but sorghum or Sudan grass, and they've actually crossed them. They're practically the same thing. It really builds organic matter and prevents soil erosion. William Dam sells it as a mix. I'd like to try it sometimes. Suppresses weeds. And then you've got your cool legumes like favas in winter, field peas, crimson clover, hairy vetch, lentils. Warm legumes are like cowpeas, alfalfa, sun hemp, white and sweet clover. Cool season brassicas are camelina, which also John, rather if you know him, is making oil out of it. It's incredible. Kale, mustard, spinach, those can all be used. Warm brassicas, turnips, daikon, and kale mustard also work in warm seasons too. And daikon, or they call it tillage radish when they sell it as a green manure in it. It's great because it breaks down, it'll aerate your soil, so you don't need to dig. You can just grow it.
I always find it worrisome to seed out alfalfa because it makes these deep roots. If you would miss or something, you know, it would make these deep roots and you can't get rid of it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I listed these things. I'm not recommending them necessarily. I don't recommend alfalfa or clover, like some clovers anyway, or I'm not even so sure about hairy vetch, but because yeah, some of them, if they go to seed, or you know, if you can't terminate them, like alfalfa's fine if it doesn't go to seed and you can kill it, then it's great for the soil. But if it survives, I know good luck getting rid of it once it gets its roots down deep. Clover can be like that too.
I feel like I need to seed that out my house.
Another cool like broadleaf crop is Phacelia. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's a pollinator. It's this little, I don't know what its genus is or anything, but it's this beautiful bluey purple flower thing with feathery leaves. Yeah.
Those grow like crazy at my place.
Phacelia?
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's a native species of Phacelia here.
Yeah.
Which
Beautiful little thing.
we might want to experiment. I think the more we can incorporate native plants into our gardens too, the better. So it might be a really good one, and it would attract, if we use the native species of Phacelia here, it would attract native pollinators, which are really important because when we're having this, you know, we're just growing alfalfa, we're mostly selecting for one type of pollinator, and they're not the native ones. Other warm crops are buckwheat, flax, amaranth, sunflower. And then you can use for certain crops to raise nitrogen levels, like buckwheat and the legumes. You can raise phosphorus levels with buckwheat and daikon. And like I mentioned before, you can use daikon to till, like as a tillage crop. Weed suppressors are most grasses. And soil builders, cowpeas, daikon, fall rye. And then we talked about how to kill them. There is a paper I just found called Cover Crop Management Using No-Till Practices in a Market Garden by Benjamin Ailes. It was written in December of 2022 from Kwantlen Polytechnical University, which is that on the island, I guess? I don't know where that is, but anyway, so Langley. So it's relatively bioregional, and he did a study on different cover crop termination practices in a no-till system. Okay, we did that. Next goes. So how are people doing? Because I feel like we're been sitting a long time. People need to get up and stretch and wiggle, or you just want me to keep going? Keep going. Wow, you're hardcore.
Just a quick question. I'm not sure when's the best time for you to address it, but are we misinformed about all these like mushroom manure, chicken manure? You know, because there's piles and piles of are sold. It seems like everyone buys to feed the garden, right? Learning that it can kind of kill the fungi, and if we're mixing it all together, is there like a better formula? Like how do we make sense of that? Because
yeah,
I'm curious about the misinformation and more the truth sometimes. Kind of like is the nature the answer, or
it's an answer. It's not the answer. I don't think there's one answer, but I'm a huge fan of compost. Compost is a big answer. The thing about buying all these things is, ideally, we want to lower our inputs. First, just cost. It costs so much to buy these things, and if we can create our own inputs, then we're doing better. And we also know what's going into it. The thing is, these things are being sold, so unless it's a trusted company that you know and have known for a long time and other people know, they could be selling you sawdust that looks like compost, or, you know, stuff that's not particularly healthy, or, you know, dead composts. A lot of commercial composts are actually dead, or they're highly bacterial and no fungi. And so they're not necessarily good. Our like municipal composting systems, they're cooking these things like to get rid of pathogens. So they're composting at extremely high temperatures, which leach out a bit, off-gas all the nitrogen. So you're buying kind of a bit of a dead compost, and it has minimal biological activity, only thermophilic, meaning hot-loving bacteria. Basically, are the only things that survive that process. It has its place, but I would recommend doing it yourself because you can control it. Yeah.
So we did a study on the landfill here about the possibility of organic composting, and I thought this was fantastic if we could do this. However, if you're talking about the way that it needs to be treated, does that make it sort of a useless product then? I mean, this might still be good in terms of waste and all of that, but.
Well, that's how municipalities look at compost. They're looking at it as a waste management issue rather than a resource, rather than the goal that it actually could be. And because of liability and this and that too, they really want to make sure that their composts are, that there's no, like, people aren't going to get E. coli because they lick the compost or something like that. You know, whatever.
That would be us.
Shouldn't reputable compost companies be sending their soils to be tested, and then you know what's in it and what levels, etc.?
Yeah, they should.
There's regular testing.
Yeah, there are definitely companies that do that, and they do biology tests, and like some of them just do nutrient testing, and some do biological testing. And they do exist. I'm not saying, oh, don't buy compost ever, it's bad, but you do have to be careful about what you're buying. And also, you don't know what was composted necessarily unless it's a reputable company. So it could be plants with a whole bunch of pesticides or herbicides on them. Do you really want to throw a bunch of herbicides into your garden when you're trying to grow plants? Like that's happened to people. In fact, I once bought a compost and put it in plants and they all died. And I was like, what's going on here? And that's probably what it was it wasn't good compost. So compost is not all created equal. So here's this one on the right. There's a Johnson Sioux bioreactor. That's a small one, but this is now considered by most people who are studying the soil food web to be the very best type of compost. It's got it's a high fungal compost, and the thing that makes it high fungal is time. It takes time. So basically, we have two types of compost: a high bacterial compost or a high fungal compost, or a mix between the both would be ideal. But if you've got already a high bacterial garden, so not much fungi because you've been tilling, or say you've been using chemical fertilizers or stuff, you'll not necessarily want to add a high bacterial compost to your soil. At the best, if the nitrate, like, so it says it can give a big growth boost. So you add your bacterial compost to your plants in the spring and they go, wow, and look great. And you're like, oh, that was awesome. And then if they keep looking good, it's probably because actually the nitrates leached out, and then the soil organic matter in the compost interacted with the soil food web you've got, and it allowed your plants to be healthy. And that's why it continues to look good. But often people apply compost and then the plants will look great for a while and then they stop looking good. And they're like, what's going on? And it's because it's a high bacterial, high nitrate compost. And then the worst thing you can have if those nitrates don't leach out is you end up with plants that have no fruits or flowers. I got a friend who had no Brussels sprouts on the Brussels sprouts. I'm like, what's going on here? And that's what's going on. There's too much nitrates. They have beautiful, healthy Brussels sprout plants, massive, but they didn't make the sprouts. So then most soils, given how we tend to garden, need fungal compost. And it's more acidic, which isn't a bad thing unless it's in too much. But acidity, this is science I don't understand yet, but are people familiar with the soil redox potential. So between a reduced or oxidated state, the more reduced a soil is, the sort of better the nutrients can go. I don't understand the science behind it, but that's a big part of what acidic soils and fungal soils do, is they reduce your soils. I wish I could explain it better. You can look it up, soil redox potential, but it's relatively new. It's mostly being studied in universities. It's not out in the garden sphere yet. And then, of course, not only having a good fungal compost is good in terms of its nutrient availability, but then you actually end up with fungi in your soil, which you want. Ideally, we don't just want the decomposing fungi. Those are cool. It's great if you're growing like garden giants in your garden and you get to eat them and they're eating the wood chips or oyster mushrooms or any of those things, shaggy manes. But ultimately, you want the ones you don't see, which are the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that are connecting with your plants and making them healthy and getting these nutrients out of the soil.
How do you make fungal compost?
So this is a really basic chart. So you have your carbon, people are familiar probably with the carbon nitrogen ratio in compost. If you're not, there's an ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio. People say it's 30-1. But I don't know, that's carbon to nitrogen, so 30 carbon to 1 nitrogen, but, or sorry, yeah. So on the left are the nitrogen rich ones, so those are your greens, on the right are your browns. And Elaine Ingham always said that ideal compost is 1/3 greens, 1/3 browns, and then 1/3 like manure. Because the manure has all these other bacteria and stuff in it. But if you want a fungal rich compost, then you add more carbon, basically, but it takes way longer. Fungi take long. If you want a quick compost, you can make a bacterial compost in 3 weeks that's fully finished. But it's gonna be, you're adding bacteria basically to your garden. If you want a fungal compost, you're looking at like a year to make a good fungal compost. But again, more carbon in your compost than nitrogen will lead to a fungal compost. There I have my big pile of wood chips. Those are great compost. If you have a chipper and you prune if you have apple or fruit trees and you prune those, the chips from the water sprouts are the ideal thing for fungal food. They're really good. The bigger chips are good too, they just take longer. And you can mulch with those too, put them in your garden. Wood chips, people say, oh, don't put wood chips in your garden because it robs it of nitrogen. It's not true. It's only true if you till it in. If it's sitting on the soil, the bacteria will be dealing with the nitrogen in the plants, and the fungi will be dealing with the wood chips, and so it won't be locking up. If you till it in, then yeah, it will. Don't till in wood into your garden.
So you're saying to put it on top?
Yeah, as a mulch.
Because the hugelculture.
What's that?
The hugelculture has it on top.
Yeah.
It's not in the middle.
But hugelculture, you're creating the whole system from scratch, kind of. Whereas this, I mean, you could dig it into your garden, but you're going to have to wait, or it's going to tie up nitrogen and stuff.
Because that sounds naturally like, right? Just the years.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. But anyway. So there's many compost methods. These are the 6 that I thought I should talk about. So moldering is what most people do, is we take our kitchen scraps and we've got either a bin or whatever, and we just toss it in there and we let it sit. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a high bacterial, kitchen scraps are really high bacterial feeders. And the thing that makes moldering compost mostly work is people just let it take a long time. So if it takes a year or 2 for your moldering compost to make compost, then you've got fungal rich compost, as long as the bottom is in touch with the soil. Don't put it in on a concrete pad or something like that. You should have aeration on the sides and a cover on the top, but let it be in contact with your soil. You can even dig down into your soil to start your moldering. You can make a pit if you want and start your moldering compost in that. It just takes a lot of time, and you want to protect it from, microbes really don't like the sun, so protect it, and also you can leach out to the water. Yeah?
Okay, yeah, like, because if it's in touch with the soil and then if it's getting rained on, then the nutrients are just
leaching into the soil, yeah. And so, you could plant around your compost. if you want. Any other questions about that? So then the second technique is thermophilic, so that's making the hot compost. Dr. Elaine Ingham has been a huge proponent of that, although she's actually changing her tune on it because this discovery of that it's not very fungal and it's too hot. But basically, that's the one where you have a third of your greens, a third of your browns, and then your manure, and you layer it in really thin layers, and you make up, it has to be at least 1 meter squared for it to sort of actually work. If it's small, it doesn't work. It wants to hold in its heat. And then you water it really well, or you can water it as you're layering it, but you want it to be about like a high moisture content. You want to be able to take a handful of it and squeeze it, and a drop of water will come out, but not like pour out, just a 1 drop come out. And then you make this, you let it sit for 3 days and it'll heat up. And that's why I have, what is it? There's my,
The soil here?
my compost thermometer. Oh, it's right beside you. You can hold that up. Yeah, this, if people want to make compost, especially thermophilic compost, you got to get one of these. For years, I was like, nah, I can figure it out by touching it and smelling it, and that's wrong. You won't. But this is like how is that, like 32-inch long, sorry people at home, compost thermometer. And so you stick this into your pile into the middle, and it will, on the dial, tell you. And this one actually has the green zone here, so it tells you when you're in the right spot, in the green zone. And ideally, that's in Celsius. It's like 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. In Fahrenheit, that's 131 to 140 or something. So it's hot. Like if you put your hand in there, it'll burn. You'll have to pull it out. It's hot. You don't want it to go. Is this okay if I'm standing here?
Yeah.
I just wanted to see y'all. You don't want it to get hotter than 140 because then it starts off-gassing the nitrogen, basically. And the way you know, I mean, obviously this will help, but other ways you can tell is if your pile gets small really quickly, it's too fast. You're going too fast. You got to add carbon then.
Or it starts to smoke.
Or, well, yeah, and then, so over 180, it will catch on fire and blow up. So you don't want that, but I don't know what you'd have to put into a compost to get it to do that.
Mostly manure.
Yeah, probably. But so in that sweet zone is where there's the thermophilic bacteria, and they're active and they're happy and doing the job of breaking down the stuff, but you're killing all the pathogens, you're killing your weed seeds. So that's the great benefit of the thermophilic compost, is if you've got diseased plants or you've just got a lot of weeds that have seeds and you don't want them, you can, or couch grass, or the roots of couch grass, throw them in there, they'll get killed. But the thermophilic bacteria will be alive and happy and doing their job and making a nice compost. Ultimately I didn't complete how to make this. So you've made it, you waited 3 days, it's gotten hot, you stuck this in, it says 135, 140, you're like, yeah, right on. Then you flip it. And then you do that probably every second day, maybe even every day if it's getting hot. If it's getting too hot too quickly, you can add carbon, or you can put air holes in it, and that'll slow it down. I've taken to doing a combination of, I mentioned the Johnson-Su bioreactor, and I'll talk about it a bit in a second, but I've taken to doing a combination of those two techniques, which is I make a thermophilic pile, I cook it, I get it hot, and then I let it sit for a year with big holes in it, like giant tubes that go through it. I put the tubes in, build the compost around the tubes, and then I pull the tubes out, cover it, and then it sits there, and it gradually becomes fungal, and it takes about a year. And so that's the way that now the soil food web people are going from here to here. Let me go back up there and make sure.
What did you call it? You called it a micro something thermometer?
This is just, I think, I forgot what I did with the box, but I think it's just called a compost thermometer. This one is from, we can pass this around, people really want to know the box's info on it.
Is that a Lee Valley thing, or?
No,
That's what I was.
The company is called Rio Temp. I bought it online. Lee Valley does sell these. They don't sell the big ones though, they sell the smaller ones, and they're kind of useless because you need a meter size one, so you need something that's at least 2 feet long. Otherwise it's too small, you're not getting in deep, because you want to get to the center of the pile. Has anybody got any more questions about thermophilic composting?
I have like a traditional compost pile, and then this year we bought like one of those rotating
The Turners,
compost.
right?
Because, it kind of, seems like it's harder to feel in the scraps and stuff in the winter. So that's not in contact with the soil, but if you add like a little bit of soil, so that helps.
What do you do with it once you've run through that thing? Like you put it into another compost, or just put it back in your garden, or what do you do?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Right.
We just got it like
Yeah.
a couple months ago, and we still have the same stuff in one side.
Right. I don't know much about those, to be honest, but there's a technique of compost making called bokashi, which is using lactobacillic bacteria to decompose, or it basically ferments your kitchen scraps. And then that's a really great system for homes, people over the winter, because it takes away the smell. You can actually compost meat and fats and oils with that. I didn't put it up here because it's really like you can make it, you can do it yourself, but you can also buy kits to do it. So if people want to look up bokashi compost making online, it's a great thing for home, like people who want to compost over the winter. I don't know about that system. I would probably do it and then put it in an outside compost in the spring and let the microbiology kind of help it along. But I don't really know. Yeah. So then I got vermicomposting up here, which people are probably familiar with. That idea of worms. Worms. So everyone like, oh, I want lots of worms in my garden. Well, actually, worms are invasive species here. I love worms, and I think they're incredible. But we're lucky. I don't think worms do well out away from our gardens in this climate. But I know in the East Coast, it's actually become a problem. Earthworms are very acidic, fungal-dominated soils with the forest there, and the worms are actually changing them, and it's affecting the trees in the forest, this ecosystem. So worms aren't as great as we like to think they are, but you can still do a worm composting at home like put it in a bin or somewhere where they're not going to get out. And again, I don't think they're going to be a problem in our area, really. So it's probably fine if you got tons of worms in your garden. They do great jobs for gardens. They're amazing, but you don't want them to get out.
There was an old farmer that was teaching me how to farm. He said those are the soils engineers.
They totally are. It's amazing. And like, so they are eating those protozoa that ate the bacteria, and they're releasing all these nutrients to plants. Plants love worms, and they are aerating the soil. They're making tunnels through the soil. They build soil structure really well. So yeah, worms are wonderful.
One thing I wanted to try was to have a little worm farm with the greenhouse under the floor,
Right.
under the ground, I mean, and then you have chickens. That's a nice picture of like,
Right.
You don't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
My question was along with the earthworms, because I remember reading something about this just recently, and I'll have to go back and do some of the research, but it really depends on the type of worm, and I do know that there's types that you use for starting a bin, like your regulars, etc. But there are ones that are invasive, like you were saying, the worms, but then aren't there also the native worms that are, you should be able to tell the difference between them. I was reading like the way you look at the worm, you can tell whether it's the invasive or not. Is that something that
My understanding is in North America, there aren't very many native worms. That's more of a European thing. And then there are worms. It's not like there aren't any at all, but it's not every ecosystem. And like I've never seen a worm out in the forest like digging. Like I dug around and I've never seen them. ants do a lot of the jobs here that worms do. But I know there's this it's like a jumping worm that's really invasive that people are really worried about. And I think, yeah, you can tell the difference between them and your red wigglers and your, the big earthworm that everyone's familiar with and the night crawlers and stuff. But I don't know if I'd even know what a native worm here would look like.
I'm not sure about Lillooet specifically. I think it was the one in Canada or North America I was reading about, but yeah, like the earthworms, they were saying better are much smaller, and then these other ones behind their saddle, it's like the size of their saddle.
Oh, okay.
And where it's positioned on the worm.
Oh.
You can kind of tell, but
Right.
again, this was a while ago I read it, and I'm just like
Yeah.
filing back to see if I can recall anything else. But
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting because I really do like the vermicomposting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like,
Yeah, so people make specific vermicomposting situations, like people may be familiar with the garbage bucket method, where you take one garbage bucket, you drill a bunch of holes along the bottom, and then you put it in another garbage bucket that has a spout in the bottom of it, and you can actually get the worm juice, they call it, because it does sort of leave this kind of worm-rich juice, and you can actually use your spigot to get your juice and pour it on your house plants or whatever. But then in the top part, the worms are, and you start with like hay or straw or something like that, and maybe a bit of manure, and then you throw in your kitchen scraps and your worms, and then they work through that, and you can harvest the castings. You can even make a little trap door and reach in and grab it if you want. So that's one method. Of course, there's so many methods. I know people knew Rod Webb and Nancy Shook. They had a worm farm, and it was like they did massive like straw bale bin basically that had worms, and then they tarped it really well in the winter, and the worms just went down and came back up in the spring. So that's one way. I personally I have red wigglers. I don't know where they came from, but they showed up in my compost, in our moldering compost, and so now I just take a handful, and when I'm going to let my thermophilic sit, I just put them in the thermophilic once it's cooled down. You don't want to put it in there when it's hot, and then they in fact, the bag of compost that I brought, there's a couple of worms in there, I saw them. So then this fourth method, Johnson Sue, was developed by a couple, Johnson and Sue being each of their last names. He works at the University of New Mexico, I think. And they developed how to make a fungal-rich compost system. And I'll just go back quickly and I'll show you that picture again. It looks like that one on the right, that's a small version. They use that remesh that you use in pouring concrete. It's quite a thick wire, and they make it into a 6-foot diameter circle. It's about 6 feet high. It sits on a pallet. The pallet has holes the size of plastic tubes that are about this big, 4 or 5 inches in diameter, made in the bottom. Then they put the tubes down inside that cylinder, and they have a wire system that holds it all in place. And then you take it's massive amounts of material, but they do anything. Like they're like, yeah, just hay, or just leaves, or just whatever. It doesn't matter. People like to do mixed. High carbon things are better. And you dump that in, get it wet. It goes through a thermophilic process. It does heat up, just not as high. And then you pull out the tubes, you cover it. It's got the landscape fabric around it to keep the sun out of it. People put sprinkler systems on timers with those little micro sprinklers to keep it moist. You want to keep it moist and protected from sunlight and protected from the weather, and then you let it sit for a year. They say, oh, you shouldn't let it freeze. And I was like, well, I live in Canada. You're from New Mexico. How do you keep a compost from freezing for, but a lot of Canadians are doing this, and they're like, it doesn't matter. They've done the microscopy. They've looked under a microscope. The biology just goes dormant in the winter, and then it wakes up. Like fungi don't die in the cold. They just don't do much. And bacteria, same. Protozoa, same. So, and you just let it sit for a year, and then you have a high fungal compost. And they're applying teas of this on massive farms that are doing regenerative farming with incredible results, like mind-blowing results. And so it's being considered to be the only way, actually, I said before, there is no one way, but for compost. if you want high fungal content compost with lots of microbiology that's storing carbon in the soil, that's the one. And maybe the way to do it around here is to do it on a community scale, because it is a lot of work to fill one of those. And if we can design sprayers, so you make your tea, I'll show you in a minute about making tea, but you can make a tea, and what they're doing is they're not applying compost to thousands of acres. They're making big tea sprayers on the back of trucks and driving them across the fields, or ATVs or what have you. And that's how they apply it. And what they're applying is the microbiology that's in that. They're not applying, it's not about the nutrients, it's about the microbiology. And that like kickstarts the soil food web. So where was I? Yes?
I once took a course on how to grow mushrooms.
Did
So
you?
I know what you're talking about. Alder Grove, they had a course and a guy was teaching it. Anyways, he talked about if there's too much bacteria, the fungi don't like to grow. So, you know, we were trying to grow oyster mushrooms in garbage bags, stuffed really tight with straw. And then you put the microbial, the fungi in there, and then that's the holes in the bag.
Right.
And that's how we were growing it. That was the simplest and cheapest way of growing this. So what do you say about the bacteria being too high and the fungi won't grow?
Well, that's in an enclosed system that you're talking about, putting it in a plastic bag.
Yeah.
When you're talking about applying it to soil food web, I don't think it doesn't apply in the same kind of way, because you're talking about a huge complex interaction cycle.
Yeah.
It's not like you're not, and because you're trying to grow oyster mushrooms, so you don't want bacteria in there.
Yeah, we had to clean it with chlorine bleach and
Yeah.
activated solution, all the surfaces, and keep it in an enclosed room that was completely without any bacteria.
Yeah, or other fungi. You don't want molds in there either. So that's why when you're doing like that mushroom growing like that, you definitely need it to be pretty much almost sterile.
Yeah.
Before you add your mycelium that you're
This
trying.
is not a perfect rush.
Yeah, and this is not a sterile system. We're trying to actually increase biodiversity rather than grow one thing.
I just had to hear what you had to say about that.
Well, that's what I have to say about that. Is that clear enough? Do you want me to say more? I could have.
That's all I got to say.
So then sheet mulching is another way you can compost in your garden just by creating garden beds out of sheet mulching. Have people done that before? Lasagna bed is another name for it. It's a good way to quickly make beds too. Yeah, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to quickly go hugelkultur. So this was mentioned before about hugelkultur, and here I don't know if you know Robin, but she made a whole bunch of these. This is her method. It's not necessarily the recommended method, but she was trying to deal with couch grass, so she put cardboard down first. Ideally, they say that logs should be in contact with the soil. Those logs will be eventually, because the cardboard will degrade, and then there will be. But so you're creating this base bed of logs, and then you're covering it with various things. She used moldy hay and sawdust, and then soil that she had, and then compost, and then covered it again with hay as a mulch. And so this creates, those logs will create a high fungal content bed, basically, and they'll degrade over time. Basically the bed will start off quite bacterial, actually, because what you've got on top is your compost and manure. She put manure in there as well, but it'll gradually over time change to being a fungal dominant system. And hugelkultur is a great way for us around here, I think, to get rid of like the wood waste that we're afraid of that's going to catch on fire in the summer. So we could be making these beds. Basically, we shouldn't be burning carbon. Like really, we should try and put it in the ground as much as possible. Even around our places, if we can't like get rid of all the wood, like get it on the ground, it'll start rotting. It's less burnable than it would be if it's like leaning against a tree or what have you. So, were you going to say something, David?
No, I'm just thinking about fire smarting, and this is just a very cool way to use some of the debris that you don't want in your garden.
Yeah.
Woody debris.
Yeah.
Be able to talk about the wood ashes from the plant, like it's so.
Okay, so wood ashes are highly alkaline. They do kill microbacteria. Really, I don't know if people are familiar with biochar, but biochar is basically it's a certain way of burning wood that in a low oxygen, high heat environment that it carbonizes, but it holds its structure and it doesn't get that fine layer of white ash on the outside. And it has millions of little tiny pores inside, which are brilliant homes for microorganisms. And actual biochar is you take this char that you've made and then you inoculate it with microorganisms. You can do that by pouring urine on it. You can do it by just putting it in your garden, letting the garden do it, but they will tie up nitrogen if it's not already activated, because first everything will go in there and it'll be in there for a bit. But it's an amazing reservoir of carbon in the soil. It's like better than anything. It's better than just wood. And I don't know if people know about terra preta in the Amazon. They discovered that indigenous people were creating these incredible soils that were allowing like the Amazon to be productive agricultural land. They were doing forest farming mostly, but biochar was a huge component in that. So wood ashes, not so much.
It's not really recommended, right? Garden beds.
No, I would. No, maybe you could put some in your compost, but again, it's going to make it alkaline. I don't know what to do with wood ash. I usually just put it down the outhouse, but you don't have an outhouse, so.
Apparently raspberries, they like wood ashes.
Yeah, in certain amounts, but you really have to be careful about how much wood ash. It's not like it's bad, but it's like about how much. And again, alkaline loving things might want some wood ash, especially if you've got a more acidic soil, but is that fine?
No.
So this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try and talk about it quickly because I think everybody's tired and we've been going for 2 hours almost. So that thing I brought in here is my microbiolator. They call it a compost tea brewer as well. I call it a microbiolator because the point of it is to actually expand microorganisms. So you're going to multiply it. You're not just, the idea isn't you're taking your compost and extracting the nutrients out of your compost and giving those nutrients to the plant. You can do that too, but that's called a compost extract. And that's great if you want to feed your house plants or you want to give your garden plants a little boost. But if you want to actually increase soil diversity and increase the microbiological activity in your soil, making a tea, you take your really good finished compost, so that compost there sat, cooked and then sat for almost a year, and then I would put it in this bag. I'll show you all.
What compost are we?
This compost.
This
This bag of compost. So this is a paint strainer bag from Builder's World, or Timber Mart, whatever they called now. And this, yeah, there's worms in there too. So you take this, and then I fill this with water. I'm not going to do this here today because it's so anyway. And I put this in, hang it from like I use binder twine, but then here I have this is an air pump. You just plug it in, and I've made this whole, I don't know if people can really see this super well, but I made this PVC pipe structure that's got tiny little air holes drilled in it, and I put my air pump into this, and this is full. Imagine this is full of water with my compost bag sitting in it. Okay, it's not, but imagine that. I plug that in, and then it's running air through here, and that's a pretty high volume air pump. So it's big enough for a 55-gallon barrel. You got to make sure you have an air pump that matches your barrel, and then I let it bubble with my compost tea in it, and it's outside, but it's actually behind our house where there's no sunlight, and I did have a lid on it until I took that picture. And I bubble that for 24 to 48 hours. And it basically, and you add, the main point is you add nutrients into the water to encourage fungal and some bacterial growth of fungal. People use molasses, but that's really a bacterial feeder. If you want to feed fungi, oats are good. Like, so I just used rolled oats, organic rolled oats, and then fish hydrolysate, which is actually fermented fish. Don't use fish emulsion, which you buy as a fertilizer.
Do the bears just come rushing in for this?
Well, we had built a fence around our plant.
Sorry.
You can make your own fish hydrolysate. It's really expensive to buy, but you put that in, it's a fungal food. It comes in a liquid form, and it doesn't actually smell because it's been fermented. When you ferment, if you're making it yourself and you're fermenting it, it does stink like horribly, and the other bears will be like, what's that? But when it's finished, it doesn't smell. And you pour that in, and you bubble it together, and that allows the fungi to like expand exponentially, and some bacteria too. Yep.
How do you apply the rolled oats? Just put it right in the water? Do you soak it
I just threw them in. Honestly, I don't really, like, I just read that somewhere. Oh, use oats. So that's what I did. I just threw some oats in there. The main thing is the fish hydrolysate is actually, and then the humic and fulvic acids from the compost. That's what makes it that dark color. They're fungal food too. And so you get that and you bubble it for 2 days, and then you have to use it within, I heard like an hour or two, but actually apparently lately they're saying up to 8 hours you can let it sit. But you don't want it to be anaerobic. So that's why the air. Anaerobic teas create a lot of they invite more pathogenic bacteria, and we're trying to avoid that. So we want aerated compost teas.
Yeah, because that was what I'd always wondered about compost teas. How is that not a breeding ground for botulism, or I guess it's acidic enough that you're not,
Well,
I guess depending.
botulism is an anaerobic. So
Right.
if you've
So
got,
if you got the air, but if
yeah.
you didn't have the air,
then
I
you're
always
running
like-
some risks, yeah.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
I used to, before I knew about all this stuff, I used to just throw manure into a 55-gallon barrel and a bunch of water and give that to my plants. Never had any problem, worked great. I was like, oh, what are they talking about? But when you actually start, it's like, well, I was lucky,
Yeah.
basically. You want to, you keep adding water to
I
it,
just have pen bottom that I stick in
right?
and keep it full of water, and it's a big drum.
Yeah. And it does,
I leave it
yeah.
for, I don't know, 24 hours before I use it.
Right.
And I just dump it around
Yeah.
the garden.
Yeah, I did
Especially on my celery.
on the celery, yeah.
They're heavy feeders and they
Yeah.
let water.
I did the same thing too. I mean, you read these things and there's all this science behind it, and there's a lot of gardeners, well, I've always been doing this and it works great. And well, that's true. And some of it is, there are other factors that we may not be considering that I don't know what they are, but they're also, it's just like a lot of times we're just lucky too. And I don't know, but what I do know that anaerobic bacteria are more pathogenic, and if we just are putting non-aerated things on our plants, especially like say lettuce, where you might just eat the leaf, like you're running risk, definitely. Did you want to say something, Dana? Very sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to know if you had a suggestion for a vegan option for the fish.
I don't know, no, I would have to look that up. Yeah, oats maybe, but, kelp actually, kelp, soluble kelp is also a fungal, it's a bacteria feeder and a fungal feeder. So you could do that. I mean, fish hydrolysate is the one that like, that's the best, but yeah, if you want to do a vegan option, probably kelp and oats. But you'll have to do some research on that probably one day. And then once this is done, you can either apply it as a soil drench or a foliar spray. So you can put it in a backpack sprayer. I would strain it again, run it through some kind of, like I just put a strainer with cheesecloth in my, either when I'm doing my, have one of those backpack sprayers, then I just strain it again before I put it in there, because you don't want to clog your sprayer tip. If you're just putting it in a watering can, it doesn't matter. You can just dump it on the plants. Yeah, time. Okay. That's it then. That's pretty much everything. So I didn't go over into the question period, did I?
No, not at all.
Oh, we still got that?
Totally, no.
Okay.
I think
So,
you have time for closing.
okay. Yeah, Al?
What was the one that you mentioned with the lactobacillus? Because I was thinking like probiotics, right?
In your compost? Yeah, well, actually, like if you got sauerkraut juice left over, if you make sauerkraut or any of that, like dump it in your compost. It's the best. Well, it's good for us. It's good for them, right? And okay, can I really quickly just talk to something super cool? So I talked about endophytes in plants, and one of the endophytes that's in plant is a type of lactobacillus. And a lot of those endophytes, they survive the digestive process in animals, including us. And then they actually become our endophytes. So we literally become what we eat, and lactobacillus is one of them. Goes into our gut, acts as a probiotic. So if we're eating healthy plants, we're actually becoming healthy humans because we are the plant.
Some of us use like horse manure, old horse manure for people who know, same with chicken manure. So there must be a place for this manure in the garden if it's used in proper proportion. Is that what you suggest?
If it's aged horse manure, sure, put it in your garden. I mean, but again, it's they're high bacterial things. So if you're gonna be moving your garden more into that bacterial early succession zone and less into the fungal zone. But it's like the only problem with horse manure and those things are wormers. Like if people worm their horses, it depends on the wormer, but they last a certain amount of time in the horse manure, and then it can actually affect your soil if you put it on too soon after they've been wormed, goats, any of those things. But I use manure. There's nothing wrong with manure. It's just about how much, and it shouldn't be raw manure though. Raw manure is not that great. It burns things. It's got a lot of pathogens in it. Ammonia, yeah, there's lots. I wouldn't use raw manure ever. Anybody? Lisa? Sorry.
Question, summer or spring cover crop, would you do peas or would you do lots of vetch to try? It sounds like I should not try.
I'll try the vetch, just keep an eye on it. Maybe don't let it go to seed.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
And then I just cut it back and then I just let the roots do their things and plant over top of that?
You can try, you can try that, or you could cover it with something that'll kill it, or you could, I totally encourage people to experiment and see what works, because I don't know everything for sure, and there's lots of cool ways that you might come up with that work.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Lisa.
Just about applying manure.
Yeah.
That's what you probably do in fall, right? You mix it and not.
Yeah, and it ages over, and it gets slowly worked into the soil by the soil microbiota. It's definitely.
Top dress with manure in fall then, or is that still gonna affect?
It won't kill anything unless it's raw manure, and then again,
You never want to top dress again with raw manure.
I wouldn't use raw manure.
Okay.
But then again, I run chickens through my soil, and that's raw manure. So.
Because the best Rebecca I ever grew, I had Muscovy ducks perching on a tire,
right?
In a tire, and then when they were done with it, it was the hugest hatch I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to affect the hatch at all. It was all winter long. So.
Well, and we put our meat birds in the garden, and they sit there for weeks and make a big thing, and then we've grown squash and that, and they're amazing. So it's like.
But then in spring you would want it in there.
Yeah, fall is definitely a better time to apply manure. But we've applied manure in the spring too. I don't know. There's this is sort of like I'm presenting this is the the way the soil biology works in the best way. But there's obviously, we do these practices, and some of them are old and have been done for a long time, and they work just fine. And I don't know, but sorry, Kathy?
Have you ever found an article about putting different things into your compost? Like this old fella that taught me how to make compost. He said, now you want to find some stinging nettle, that's really good. And for all these different chemicals and minerals that you want in compost. But I don't know I think that was good for, I can't remember now, but it was some odd trace element.
Yeah.
And I don't know what plants would need those or anything, but the idea was to put a variety into your compost, so.
That's the key, is variety, like the diversity of plants. And that's the same with having the green manures of a variety of things, because plants are taking up different things in different amounts and communicating with different soil microorganisms to get those things. So if you've got
big variety in your compost, then you're going to have a diversity of microbiology in your compost.
Yeah, I have a question.
Another thing was watch the weeds and you know what they're telling.
Yeah.
What the soil conditions
Yeah.
are by the weeds you're growing.
Yeah, and well, here's a point I forgot to mention, but as we move our soils more into that ideal 1-to-1 fungal to bacterial ratio, weeds will disappear because they don't like it. It's more like they just are like, man, weeds are first successional, second successional ecological organ. They like disturb soils. So if we're tilling every year, we're going to have weeds every year. And it's this great irony. We till to get rid of weeds, but tilling is causing the weeds. Because also if you stop tilling and you've got weeds, eventually you're not continuously bringing seeds back up to the soil surface. They're down there. They're not going to germinate as the soil builds up.
I think essentially you want to till once, right? And then you would use those other harvesters.
You can, but I mean, it depends on what you're tilling, like what you're growing. If you're trying to get rid of like a field of grass or something, tilling could work. Sorry?
Cardboard works.
Cardboard's a great one. Tarps. Yeah.
Kill everything.
Yeah.
Water can get through it.
So is there a special technique for using soil for your root crops?
So, you mean other than using
Other
like
than
tillage radish as a cover crop? But the other thing is a U-bar digger, if anyone's familiar with those, or they call a broad fork. If they're great. There's nothing wrong putting, or even just a pitchfork. There's nothing, or digging fork. There's nothing wrong doing this, putting holes in your garden soil and lifting it up. It's when you flip it over and break it up that the problem happens.
That's
So
the hard work.
it's the flipping. Oh, I know. You don't have to do that. Just go. You can go and with your fork like that, or if you got a broad fork, they're way faster. And then you can aerate your soil and loosen it up. And then you can put your cardboard down or your manure and then your cardboard and sheet mulch and whatever you want. How are we doing?
I have a question.
Dana?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share that 2022 article in the cover crop that you mentioned.
Sure.
Different cover crops in the land, maybe.
You want me to just send that to you, or do you want me to?
Yeah.
Or I can just tell you his name, you can look it up.
Yeah, sure.
It was written by Benjamin Ailes, A-L-L-E-S. And from Quantum, and it's I think it's just available on the web. Benjamin Ailes, A-L-L-E-S, written in December 2022 from Quantum Polytechnical University, and the paper's called Cover Crop Management Using No-Till Practices in a Market Garden. I forget the man's name now, Jesse. Anyway, in our wonderful library, there's a book. I can't even remember what it's called. I've taken it out so many times and been told to bring it back late so many times. But this guy Jesse. Oh damn!
I think that's on his catalog. This guy Jesse.
If you message me later, I'll put it on our.
Okay. Anyway, he's got a whole. It's a book about no-till growing, using regenerative practices. It's in our beautiful library, and he's great. And he also has like a YouTube channel and does a podcast. Farmer Jesse calls himself on YouTube and his podcast. And he's got a lot of like how to terminate crops and how to use green manures and how to make composts and stuff.
I just want to mention for tomorrow, for Seedy Sunday, we also have a garden expert, Sue Senker. She's calling herself a garden guru. If you have any practical questions, she has done a lot. She has lots of knowledge.
She's involved in that McKay project too. Yeah.
What time would that be?
So it's from 11 to 3, the Seedy Sundays.
Is there any
At the
particular
rec
time that
center.
people are talking?
No, we don't have any presenters. We have displays and vendors and the Rain Shadow Cafe, which Paisley is gonna cook.
A raffle.
So good.
Raffle. Those
Are we
two
doing a raffle
people.
together?
We are.
Great raffle prices. So please come.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.